Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Steve Goetz. I would pronounce it in the German way, Goetz, but pleasure to have you on the show. You are a industry veteran for 26-year tenure at Medtronic, and then you decided to jump over to Motif Neurotech, which is a startup started by previous guest Jacob Robinson. He was on like 5 years ago. This was, I think, even before he started the company, and he was talking about different things, but basically this is a minimally invasive implant that's semi-implanted. It's not really a brain implant, but I guess Steve will describe it a little bit better, and we're going to go over his career trajectory. I'm very curious about that. So Steve, do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very good introduction. So yeah, Steve Goetz, very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. As you mentioned, 26 years at Medtronic in and around neuromodulation. So I started in a little venture that was working on neuromodulation aspects in corporate science and technology, moved into neuroproper early in my career, and just kind of grew with the business. When I started, it was very small, handful of engineers, mostly spinal cord stim back in the day. And it's grown into alternative therapies, so implantable drug pump, pelvic floor therapies, pelvic health, or incontinence, and then, of course, a whole variety of deep brain stimulation therapies, which I worked on for many years, understood the opportunities in mental health, and also understood that was a hard thing for big strategic med tech to pursue at this point. And that kind of came together with Jacob spinning out his technology. Very different level of invasiveness, which we can talk more about, which was intriguing to me after sort of banging our heads on invasive med tech for a long time and not really getting the translation that we wanted. And then this sort of unmet, unserved population in mental health. And those things all kind of came together, and with some career interests of my own to cause me to make the big leap this summer after almost 26 and a half years at Medtronic. To what is from very, very big med tech to very, very small med tech to Motif as employee number 5 or 6, something like that.
Well, hopefully you can grow it to something the size of Medtronic.
That is the goal. That is the goal. At least a little bigger than we are right now.
Yeah. So wait, so I don't know if I understood. You were at a smaller group, or you were still at Medtronic in the beginning and then it spun off, or you were acquired by Medtronic, or how did that work?
So started in Medtronic, started in a corporate science and technology group that was working on as sort of where they put things that were not really ready for revenue. So a business unit might not want to kind of sink the money into it, with the idea of getting it to that point of translatability and then handing it back to a business unit. So it was a corporate function, kind of a science and technology group that was chartered to do that kind of work. And a number of things came out of there. The incontinence therapies came out of there. Interestingly, sleep apnea therapy came out of there that Medtronic later put on the shelf and has since become Inspire Medical. I worked on that very early in my career. A number of other kind of smaller therapies that moved or didn't move. But a lot of it was neuro adjacent. And so in that corporate science and technology role, we were already working a lot with neuro. And then as that group kind of got dissolved in one of the corporate restructures, we subsumed into neuromodulation proper. So always in and around neuro, early days, not quite in neuro, but adjacent. And then quickly, early in my career, in neuro proper, in core development. So I started as an R&D engineer, working mostly on external systems, programming systems, and then kind of grew from there into technical leadership of programs and spinal cord stim and deep brain stimulation, and then long stints as chief engineer for that therapy. So kind of a 1 foot in R&D, 1 foot in the business unit, kind of shepherding the portfolio from there into the business unit itself. So I spent almost 3 years as sort of the embedded technologist within the brain modulation business. And then the last couple of years back out in kind of a research and development R&T role. So always in and around that neuromodulation business, but early days, not quite part of it, but working on those kind of projects.
Yeah, that sounds almost like a research lab at a university. And were you a PhD or not?
No, I joined Medtronic just a bachelor's engineering, electrical engineering. Did later get a master's degree, part of a post-secondary education or a go to school while you learn kind of a benefit from Medtronic. Got a master's degree from University of Minnesota. But yeah, I started as a BSWE 1 year out of school.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that sounds very similar to this. And then it sounds like it was a successful, arm of Medtronic. I always thought they didn't do much. I mean, like we said, like we were just talking about before we started recording, is I haven't really had any Medtronic veterans on the show, so I don't really know how it works. But I always thought that they, bought companies or something like this, but I didn't know that they were actually seemingly quite successful at R&D.
Well,
right?
it's hard to generalize. I've seen kind of in that time a whole lot of different models of innovation, and that early days, the corporate enterprise was sort of driving more of it, and the age-old problem in sort of commercial scale businesses is you've got a quarterly number to hit, and that can often make big strategic investments tough, right? The first thing to go is the thing that's going to give you revenue in 5 years when you need revenue this year. And so there are a lot of different strategies to sort of mitigate that challenge, because enterprises want to grow, they want to plant the big disruptive seeds, but they also have to deliver in the short term. And so sometimes those are separated. You've got revenue generating units that are more incented to turn revenue quickly and make shorter term investments. And then you've got these corporate functions or incubators, internal incubators, that are incented to be disruptive, to do the big 5 year, 7 year, 10 year thing. So there are those kind of models. Sometimes, the enterprise says, well, we're not yielding the kind of innovation we want, so let's push this stuff back out to the branches, and sometimes it pulls it back to the trunk. There's no best answer there, and there's probably no universal answer for how big strategics do it. But in my time at Medtronic, I saw both happen. I saw both work. I saw both not work. And there are misses, and Inspire is arguably one of those. It was in Medtronic, kind of put on the back burner because of the sort of lack of the opportunity to invest. And thanks to the vision of Tim Herbert, he sort of pulled it off the shelf and convinced everyone at Medtronic that, hey, you're not going to pursue it. Let me take it out. Let me pursue it. And, I say the rest is history, although it's a bit more nuanced than that. It was a long journey. So there are those who say, wow, Medtronic missed an opportunity. And there are others who say, no, that was, given the sort of journey that had to go through to get to where it is today, that was actually it created more value to let that go out. So even something like that seems like a clear, could have been Medtronic, but wasn't. Yeah, maybe that's for the best after all. So yeah, so some innovation can happen a lot of ways. It can happen internal, external, organically, inorganically, and there's time when one of those works and some of those don't work, and I've seen it go all different ways.
Yeah, I've seen commercials for the Inspire, so that's a pretty big success, I guess, right? So
they are direct to patient. They're rocking and rolling. Tim is still running that organization. There's still some of the old Medtronic, the spin out people left, and great to see them being successful, and great to see a medtech story be successful at that scale. And yeah, when you're running Super Bowl ads to direct to patient, something must be going well.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned trunk and stems and branches and everything like this. What does the organization look like inside of that? Like, I guess where you were at, how many people are involved, and all this kind of stuff. How might it differ from a university structure too?
Yeah. So within a given business unit at a company like Medtronic, there's often different functions. So there's often a very translational function called development, product development, that is about chartering programs and running them to commercial access. So a little bit more incremental innovation, sometimes very important, but they're basically taking things where there's a high confidence, high predictable pathway to execution and executing. So in theory, they should be predictable, they should be low risk, they should get to market on a schedule. There's usually one or more teams upstream of that who are doing kind of more exploratory research. And these are called research teams, applied research, translational research, sometimes research and technology, sometimes advanced development, but they're typically a little further up in the funnel, and they're thinking a little bit more about those higher risk, higher reward kinds of things. In a company like Medtronic, that might be 20% of the total, 10% of the total, so different sort of portfolio mixes. The big focus is typically translational development, smaller focus on advanced development or research. But the goal of that organization is to basically get things ready for development. So how do you reduce the risk? How do you do the basic discovery, the feasibility, so a thing can be ready for that predictable, turn the crank, get it to market on a schedule? And the relationship between those two functions, as you might imagine, sometimes really smooth. Like there's handoffs and it's like a relay race, and sometimes it's dropped batons, and research thinks they're done and development thinks they're not done, and there's tension at that interface because, again, the incentives are a little different. Research and technology about big impact, product development about very predictable time, lower risk time to market, and those two things don't always fit so nicely together. But in Medtronic, that's basically how it was organized, and those research teams felt probably a little bit more like an academic lab, especially the applied or translational research, very close to customers, very close to academic sites, figuring out what could work, and typically a handoff to advanced development or somebody to take that insight and make it ready, reduce the risk to go to market, and then a much larger development team that's making a safe and scalable medical device. So those three parts work together, and on one end, very much engineering, on the other end, much more academic lab-like research, and usually some connective tissue in between to kind of smooth out that impedance mismatch a little bit.
So yeah, what do those teams look like? Is it really almost like a PI, like a professor and some students or something like this? And then I guess how big are they? Is one bigger than the other, for example? And yeah, I'm very curious about the structure.
Yeah, so hard to generalize, and it's changed a lot over the years. But in one of those applied research teams, they're typically pretty focused on a specific area. So as an example, a team working in and around deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, that's a cluster. There might be a similar cluster for the pelvic floor therapies, a similar cluster for the pain therapies. So there's between 3 and 5 of those clusters in a company like Medtronic, who are each focused on their domain. And the sizes of those teams sort of depend on the scales of those businesses, but think 5 to 10 people in the team, something like that. So it's pretty small, like a academic lab sort of scale. Usually a leader of that function who's kind of organizing that work. Feels like a lot of people, but really that sort of translates into a couple of 2 or 3 big areas of focus with a couple of initiatives in each area. So there's a lot of decision making goes into how you organize that portfolio. What's your strategy in the market, and how are you going to invest your research resources to sort of maximize that strategy? So it can be very open-ended and pathfinding, but typically there's a playbook that you're trying to execute. And that's how you kind of make progress in that space. So that's sort of probably the furthest upstream. Those teams often work a lot with external partners, so academics, physicians who are doing research. There's often a process in these companies, Medtronic included, to do physician-sponsored research. So one flavor is Medtronic's driving the work, sponsored research. We're going to customers, patients with our technology and trying to prove a thing. Sometimes it flips around. A physician's got a good idea, and then a company like Medtronic can support it. The goal of both is the same. It's to take an idea, gain evidence that idea is going to be impactful, maybe de-risk it, maybe sort out an algorithm or a classifier or whatever it is, but basically reduce the risk so you can hand it off to the next stage. Typically, that next stage is a group of, still fairly, research-minded folks, but a little bit up the technology pipeline. So doing technology work, doing advanced developments. So maybe you've got an algorithm, you've shown that it works, n equals 5, something like that. You say, hey, there's value here. That next stage is to start to think about how to turn that value into a scalable product. So maybe there's a new circuit that needs to be designed, or a new classifier that needs to be coded, or something like that. So that team is basically doing that early stage work to prove that it's feasible in a med tech device. And when that stage is done, that's kind of where you charter a program to go do the work. Those research teams might be 5 to 10. That kind of applied technology, advanced development might be a little bigger, but on that same scale. A major med tech platform development might be 100 people, might be 150 people, right? So the scale goes up a lot to take this nugget of insight that's turned into a de-risked technology and actually take that to market in a device. And this is where you start to have specializations. You've got people working on the implant, you've got people working on the programmers, you've got people working on the therapy delivery, the leads, the wires that take the signal to the brain. There's a whole bunch of functions in each of those teams. You've got electrical, you've got mechanical, you've got software, firmware, you've got risk, quality people, regulatory people. That's when things really stack. And so I think you probably can see the motivation of risk reducing before you turn that big engine on, right? So if you start a big program that you don't know how to finish, a very expensive endeavor. And so you want to really shake out all the science risk, all the technology risk, be pretty sure you can execute a thing before you turn on that big engine, because it's expensive once you go.
Interesting. Yeah, this is really cool. This is a nice insight into how this all works. So you're saying there's like 3 to 5 groups, and each one has like, let's say 3 to 5 projects. So they're the research groups, right? And so that big team might only be working. There might only be one big team working on one big project at any time, right? Or are there multiple big teams?
So yeah, so it sort of depends on the scale of the company. So Medtronic's may be an interesting one with therapies in 3 or 4 different spaces. You can kind of think about a big project or a few big projects for each therapy. So in the brain modulation portfolio, you might have one really big project and a couple of tuck-in projects. But you probably have something similar in the pain business, something in the pelvic health business, and maybe even a pump project running. And so at that R&D organizational level, there's a lot of plates to keep spinning, and a lot of, as you can imagine, contention between those businesses. So who gets priority to the resources, and how do we organize that portfolio so we can execute? And so the thing you very quickly realize is if all 4 of those businesses want to do a major device platform, that part of the organization gets really overbooked. Right? You don't have enough, device engineers to go around. And so there's often a sort of, one level above those therapies, a conversation to say, well, how do we sort of optimize this portfolio? So maybe we can do 2 big device projects at once. And so that's going to be these 2 businesses, and the other businesses come and maybe they have big therapy delivery projects, so complementary resource sets. There's a lot of this sort of capacity management that happens across this complex portfolio, across these business units, of course, influenced by personalities, but also influenced by, which businesses are generating the most revenue, which businesses have the most competitive threats. A lot of factors go into the optimization of that complex problem. And of course, that's one of those gnarly problems. There's no answer. There's a set of answers that might be better or worse for a given outcome. But that's sort of the strategy problem at a company of that scale is, how do you deploy these finite resources across these businesses in the way that generates the most benefit to patients and the most return to the organization? And you might imagine it's not always a smooth process.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And there's a lot of moving parts there, and I don't know. It seems like it works well, I guess. So. And now, a word from our sponsor. CEITEC Nano provides custom solutions for neural interface hardware design, development, fabrication, and testing. CEITEC Nano specializes in microfabrication in parylene and polyimide, thin film ceramics, and conducting polymers. If you need custom neural interface hardware made with quality at an affordable price, you should contact CEITEC Nano in the heart of Central Europe in Brno, Czech Republic. Now, back to the show. Okay, so let's maybe talk about Motif and what's it all about, and then I guess what was it that got you to get off your butt and go into a different company, like end a 26-year run?
Yeah, well, I will say a couple of things, and the first is just sort of career development. 26 years in a place, a lot of things are true. One thing that's not true is novelty, right? So you've seen a lot of things. You've seen that cycle go from internal to external innovation and different organizational structures. And so personally, I was looking for something just a bit new. The other thing that's true is that complex sort of operational management of balancing these portfolio needs and capacity planning. It's a really interesting problem, but it can be a frustrating problem in that it's hard to maintain focus on a thing, and especially on a new thing, because there's so many kind of incumbent needs and stakeholders. And so as I sort of looked around and said, well, what am I interested for my next step? I'd done a lot of things. I'd done a lot of technology developments, beautiful projects working on Percept and brain recording and Sensite, directional stimulation, all these great technology innovations. one of the things I hadn't done is had the opportunity to kind of take a new therapy from start to finish. And so that was something I was looking for. And for a lot of reasons, just felt like big med tech wasn't the place to do that. And it has to do with that focus. It has to do with that runway and that sort of internal competition between what you got to do to keep your existing businesses running and this disruptive opportunity that might be on the horizon. And so I just felt like, a startup with the focus and the runway to do that novel thing really well was going to be the right fit. So I was kind of in that mind space. Started to look around for the kinds of opportunities where my background would be useful, but weren't quite so close to things that I had done at Medtronic, and that's where this novel stimulation target and the mental health space kind of both came in. Again, Medtronic's thought about mental health, doesn't have an active business there, so this was like a step sideways. And while what we're doing at Motif is brain stimulation, it's a little bit of a different approach and a little bit of a different target. So maybe I'll spend a step there and describe what Motif is up to. So I'll take 2 steps back. In mental health, there's a lot of great mechanistic de-risk from a therapy called transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this is big magnetic coils sitting outside the head, and a pulse of high currents generates a field. That field generates sympathetic current flow on the cortex. That current flow stimulates a region of the cortex. And this has been used to explore the many different therapies in the cortical space. Can be used to elicit muscle contractions if you're over motor strip, but specifically when you're over these prefrontal regions, has been turned into a very effective therapy for a number of things, including treatment-resistant depression. So that's all great. That's all really positive. What is also true is because it's an in-clinic therapy, access to that therapy is not great. So you've got to live in a city with a center that's offering this. And because the therapy is delivered over a course of time to allow the brain to sort of react and adjust and kind of achieve neuroplastic response, can be a very burdensome therapy for a patient. So the standard course historically was 36 sessions over 6 weeks. So 6 days a week for 6 weeks in clinic, getting this therapy. There are accelerated modalities now that compress that into a week, but it's like a week inpatient in clinic. So very hard for the patient to access both geographically, but also just logistically. And so the concept at Motif is to take that de-risk mechanism. So we know stimulation of dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex is very efficacious in treatment-resistant depression. Our question is, can we develop a cranial stimulator that can do that in the comfort of a patient's home, on demand, and with a dosing profile that is matched to that patient's acuity and severity, that both treats depression and some days, at some point in the future, turns into a maintenance therapy that prevents relapse altogether. And what that looks like to us is basically a pea-sized stimulator that fits in a minimally invasive burr hole, sits on top of the dura, so not brain penetrating, that delivers this therapy powered externally from a wearable, like a hat or a headband. We feel like that's the right mix of technologies, minimally invasive, one-time procedure with this at-home, externally powered, on-demand therapeutic delivery mechanism that takes that mechanism from TMS and gets it outside of the clinic and deploys it to hopefully a whole lot more patients in a whole lot more reliable and consistent way with high compliance, which hopefully at least has the benefit of what's seen in TMS, but maybe even more as we dial in those dosing protocols and really explore what's possible in a flexible and high dose intensity regime outside of the clinic. So that's what we're up to. And those are some of the reasons why I got excited about stepping up from Medtronic, the focus in this area, the runway, the novel technology, and hopefully a place where my background can be applied usefully to this new problem.
What was the success rate of the TMS currently, and what do you guys hope to achieve?
Yeah, so it certainly varies depending on exactly what treatment modality, but some of the accelerated modalities show, efficacy rates, response rates up north of 80%, which is pretty good. So taking the most treatment-resistant, depressed patients who have failed every other intervention, sometimes have really struggled through invasive therapies like electroconvulsive therapy, basically controlled seizures, really have tried everything and aren't responding, and to take that patient population and have that kind of response rate, it's really successful therapy. And our goal is to try to hit those numbers, but do it in this kind of minimally invasive, outside of the clinic, at home, on demand way.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So, okay, so what would, I mean, we're not talking about brain surgery, but it's like very close to it. You're going into the skull. What does this surgery look like? How long does it take? I don't know. Would you do it, I guess?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So spending a long time working in deep brain stimulation, talking to functional stereotactic neurosurgeons, you get a little desensitized to brain surgery. So if you talk to a neurosurgeon about DBS, it's kind of the least invasive thing they do. So it's a small burr hole, opening in the dura, and then a cannula to target. And the brain, you'd think poking the brain with that cannula, that stick, would be pretty disruptive, but the texture of the brain, it's fibrous. It's heard it described as sort of overcooked noodles all stuck together in a ball. So you drive that cannula through it, and things kind of get out of the way, and it's pretty safe. However, there is the potential for serious adverse events. You can hit a blood vessel, you can have bleeds, you can have permanent deficits. And it was kind of my experience in talking to a lot of patients, talking to a lot of referring neurologists who maybe aren't quite as normalized to this brain surgery, talking to the general and community neurologists who are the furthest away. That's a pretty scary thing. And a lot of that fear comes from the very infrequent but possible serious adverse events. So when you have to tell a patient that there is a risk of permanent deficit or death, that's a clarifying moment. And a lot of patients don't get further than that. They exit the pipeline at that point. So I've always sort of been curious whether and this isn't a knock on DBS. I love DBS. It's a great therapy for a lot of things, but it's struggled to kind of drive to standard of care kind of numbers. In a geography like the US, maybe 10% of the patients who are indicated are treated. Maybe it's 15%. It's not 50%. It's not 70%. And so at some point, after kind of banging your head on that wall for 20 years, you got to start to look in the mirror and say, well, is it us, or is it me? Is there something fundamental about this technology that's just going to be a barrier for the foreseeable future? So that's what got me really curious about Motif. So Motif is invasive. You do have to make an incision in the scalp and make that burr hole. So a 14 millimeter, about a half-inch craniotomy, a little hole in the skull. There's a tool that makes that very easily for a surgeon, very standard tool that makes that. But because we don't pierce the dura, those subsequent risks, the potential of a bleed, the potential of a adverse event, deficit, death, aren't really there, right? So you're not touching the brain, you're not penetrating the brain. A lot of the serious stuff goes away. And so it's a hypothesis of mine, and we'll test this out at Motif, that there's an inflection point there where you don't have to share those adverse events in that informed consent, where a lot more patients will say yes to this therapy. So that's our goal, is a burr hole device that fits in that burr hole, doesn't penetrate the dura, delivers the therapy. It could be a 20 or 30 minute kind of outpatient procedure, no follow-up monitoring for hemorrhage, no imaging, these kind of things that are part of DBS, just not going to be part of this therapy. So if that's all true, we'll see. We'll test that hypothesis, whether this could be a very scalable procedure. But to answer your question, a lot more comfortable with this kind of a procedure than I would be with a deep brain stimulation procedure, because of that risk profile.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I guess I've seen some deep brain stimulation surgeries here at University of Florida, and I'm a bit queasy with some of this stuff, and seeing brain. It's kind of it's not my favorite thing. I had to be in the other corner, kind of holding onto a chair to make sure I didn't faint. But
breathing deeply,
breathing
we've all
deeply.
been
Yeah,
there.
it wasn't to fainting level, but yeah, I wasn't feeling good. But yeah, this sounds like it could be much easier. And then, is this something that could be done even by a lower skilled person? It doesn't have to be like a neurosurgeon. It could be a nurse. Could it be a guy in the alleyway? This almost sounds like a dentist.
Yeah, it'll be a while before we get to dentists, but the specialization is a lot lower. So for deep brain stimulation, there's a sort of subspecialty of neurosurgery called functional stereotactic neurosurgery, very specialized. Not that many of them in a given geography. I think there's something like, on the order of hundreds in the US who have that kind of specialization. To make a burr hole, a lot more people can do that. You go from a few hundred to several thousand people in the US who can do a burr hole. over 200,000 burr holes are made in a given year in the US because they're made for a lot of reasons, certainly DBS, but also biopsies and cranial electrodes for epilepsy and a lot of other reasons to make a burr hole. And so we kind of take a step up that ladder from very, very specialized functional stereotactic neurosurgeons to a more general neurosurgeon. I think there are opportunities in the future to make this very, even less sort of specialized. We certainly have a roadmap to go from a device that fits in a 14 millimeter burr hole to a device that could fit in a much smaller twist drill hole. And that all kind of moves us in the right direction towards access and scalability, both in the US and OUS as well. So not quite back alley, not quite dentistry yet, but we're hopefully moving in that direction very quickly.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I think that's a big part of it, is basically making it a lot cheaper. So, okay, but that goes to the other side, is, you got the reimbursement side, the insurance, how you guys get paid, where you guys get money. And a lot of times it's more advantageous to have the, super fancy surgery because you can bill more. How does it look for the reimbursement side?
Yeah. So it's early days for our reimbursement. We have done kind of analysis and gotten consultants to look at this. And there's always a couple of parts to reimbursement. So there's that set of reimbursable events around the surgery itself, and that's what pays the hospital, it's what pays the surgeon, and that's usually what pays for the device itself. And then there's sort of the fee structure, the payments for actually managing this thing afterwards, which often get forgotten. And so we've looked at both, and we think that there are existing codes with the opportunity for some new codes in the cranial implant space that we can drop into with a device that's a lot simpler than other devices that live in those codes right today. And so actually have a fairly favorable profile, similar cost of device, but a much simpler procedure for the same reimbursement actually means there's more profit back to the hospital, back to the surgeon. So that could be very favorable. And again, the capacity issues around something like DBS, which can take 2 to 4 hours to do a procedure, occupies an OR for a day. Maybe you can schedule 2 of those in a day if you're really predictable. With a 20 or 30-minute procedure, we're not going to step on that OR's ability to do other procedures, which is a big deal. OR capacity is certainly a factor. In that sort of referral space, there's already sort of a community of what I'll call interventional psychiatrists. These are people who are referring to TMS, referring to ECT. What we're trying to do is add another tool to their toolbox so they can now refer to a surgeon with the idea they get that patient back and they can manage that patient. And there are fairly favorable codes for payment of sort of programming of these devices, configuration, that aren't really available to that community right now. And the very few exceptions of people who are partnered with a center doing research, for DBS in neuropsychiatric space. And that could be a very favorable, sort of reimbursable event for that interventional psych. And post-COVID, there's actually really nice movement on sort of making some of that telehealth a remote. So what we can start to look forward to is, a fairly favorable reimbursement for the implant, a fairly nice set of reimbursements for configuration and maintenance, programming of these devices for interventional psychiatrists, with a sort of annuity of telehealth remote follow-ups to manage those patients over time. So get a depressed patient into a remission and then keep them in that remission via sort of monitoring maintenance over time. That's what we're looking forward to in terms of reimbursement. And, as we all know, you can't think early enough or hard enough about reimbursement. A lot of companies founder on that after they get to market. We're trying to think forward and specifically trying to design some of our early evidence and trials to support that story that I just told. So we think there's a really nice pathway to at least to make reimbursement not a barrier to access for patients.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is I guess a credible case, and kind of like you said, you make up with it with quantity over, not quality, but quantity. You make it up with quantity, and maybe that OR or the number of surgeries per hour or whatever, the cost per hour, the revenue per hour might even increase due to something like this. So yeah, I can believe it. And then obviously it opens it up to other hospitals that weren't able to do something like this before, and eventually that back of the alley dentist that we've been talking about.
Well, And the other factor here is the payers. And so if you're a payer and you're looking at, I could send a patient to TMS, that's a course of transcranial magnetic might be $15,000. The average time to relapse is something like 11 months. And so I'm going to be paying roughly once a year for that TMS therapy. Alternatively, there's this implantable system, and yeah, it costs more than one course of TMS, but it costs about the same as two. And so if your payback on that investment is, sort of 2 years or less, that's a really favorable thing from an insurer. Even the US insurers who have this, super narrow window of I pay for this patient as long as they're employed at this job, even in that sort of calculus, this will be pretty favorable for an insurer to cover this as a cost saving measure over time as these patients come back and need subsequent care. And of course, we'll have to have the evidence to support that, with durable effect and the ability to sort of treat and retreat with our device. But again, that's something that we'll collect through our pivotal trials and hopefully be in a very good position to get insurance companies excited about this therapy compared to the cost of alternatives.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, they like to see, like a 2x or 10x, improvement or something like this, but you could make a case even with this. Yeah, so I guess we didn't really talk about the technology too much. What is this? Why is this possible now and it wasn't possible before? I know this is more of a question for Jacob, but I guess you could, do your best.
I'm happy to give it a swing, and he is absolutely the expert, but I'll give you the a version of it here that I think is probably good enough for today. So right, what makes it possible to miniaturize a medical device? And there's a lot of things that need to be true there. You got to have a hermetic enclosure. You got to fit your electronics inside. These things are very much possible. The thing that often limits it is your ability to either power that device or provide power externally. And so batteries start to really struggle when you get to that scale, especially batteries that can deliver the high energies that the cranial stimulation require. And so externally delivered power is one of the workarounds there. And this is used in a lot of places. Cochlear implants use this, other neuromodulation systems use this. And the standard technology to do this is called inductive coupling. So you have a coil outside, a coil inside. The coil outside's powered, the coil inside has an induced current in it. You harvest that induced current to power your system. And that works well. Most rechargeable neuromodulation systems, spinal cord stimulators use this. Where it starts to not work so well is when the internal coil starts to get very small. And so basically the aperture you have for coupling is really small. It's very sensitive to offsets and to angle misalignments. And so while you can get very small inductive systems to work, they can be very sensitive to placement, very fiddly, very not patient-friendly. And sometimes the power density is not great. So the scaling of that energy transfer starts to get really bad as the coils get really small. And this is true for other technologies, midfield, RF. The limiting factor is that antenna and the scaling of that antenna as a sort of energy density function versus the area of the antenna. So where we're going to go a little differently, and this is really Jacob's history and probably what he talked to you about last time he was on the show. His lab has been working for many years to mature a technology called magnetoelectric films. And these are basically very small films comprised of a magnetostrictive element, so something that changes shape in the presence of a magnetic field, coupled to a piezoelectric element, something that generates electrical energy when its shape changes. And so you fasten those two things together and induce an external magnetic field. The magnetostrictive elements creating strain in the piezo element, that strain creates electricity, and you can power a system. And at the scales that we're trying to miniaturize to, the energy density of these magnetoelectric films is really good compared to the alternatives, as is the sort of misalignment and orientation sensitivity. And so we think this will yield both a miniaturized device that can be high power and also be very friendly for users. So if you put your charging hat on a little crooked, it's still going to work. And that's something that may not be true of some other technologies. So that's really the sort of technology innovation that lets us get small. And that's certainly true at the 14 millimeter size, but it's even more true as we get smaller than that. So that twist drill, that back alley dentistry scale device, really tough to make with traditional technologies. So that's kind of the core element. Everything else we're doing is in support of that. So again, non-hermetic enclosures, so the magnetic energy isn't attenuated, stimulating electrodes, everything else we can kind of take off the shelf or find partners for. But that magnetoelectric film is kind of core innovation that allows miniaturization, that allows the invasiveness profile we need to scale, and that allows our roadmap of even smaller devices in the future.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Yeah, it is a big thing, you know, especially batteries and everything like this. That's very dangerous to have implanted in the body. I mean, obviously, a few years ago, Samsung phones were exploding, but imagine that happening inside of your body. And then, yeah, they have the Qi chargers, the you know, wireless charging on the phone, but those are quite big, multiple centimeters. So obviously, you don't want something that big in the body. So yeah, it's
small and lightweight, and it sort of fits this therapy delivery protocol as well. So even if you can get a rechargeable battery to work, there's a little bit of maintenance associated with that. You don't want to let your batteries over discharge. You kind of want to keep them topped up. And in this particular disease state, if we can treat a patient who is depressed and they become well, they may not need therapy again for a year or for 2 years. And so having a system that can deliver the high energies periodically when needed, and then just kind of be quiescent, be present and inactive when it's not needed is actually just a really nice fit, because you don't have to maintain that. You don't have to be reminded that you have a disease state, that you were depressed. You can just let it go and pick it up again when you need it. So it's actually a really nice fit for this kind of a intermittent, periodically delivered episodic therapy or intervention.
Yeah, that was something that always got me for, deep brain stimulation is you have these leads and everything going, under your skin, and then you have the battery pouch, kind of on your chest. So it kind of messes up your bikini line, I guess. But with your guys' method, you could still, it's bikini ready or bikini
it
compatible.
Is bikini ready. Absolutely. It should disappear into that burr hole. It's very well protected there. Yeah. Again, DBS is great, but that system you described, not only has consequences for the patient, but it has a lot of engineering challenges. And so when a DBS or spinal cord stimulation system fails, it's because of the wires. It's because of the connections. You've got in DBS a device in the pectoral space. You've got an extension that goes up in the neck, a second connection behind the ear, and then a lead that goes through the burr hole into the brain. And each of those interconnection points is a source of failure. You can get fluid ingress, you can get leaks, you can get motion through the neck. If there's a fall or an accident, car accident, there's a lot of relative stress on that system that leads to failures. And the simplicity of the system, it makes me as an engineer really excited for a super reliable system that's just going to last forever and be there when the patient needs it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty exciting stuff. So what's the progress of the company? Where are you guys at now? What's the next few years look like too?
Yeah, so it is an early stage company. So a lot of the things we're working on are that I've described are aspirational, but there has been a lot of de-risk and a lot of good momentum. So we are a seed stage company right now. We're in the midst of raising a round to get us through this technology development phase and into a EFS study, an early feasibility study in humans in about 18 months. So that's kind of the phase of the company. Jacob and team have done a tremendous amount of great de-risk. So they've kind of walked through small animal models into large animal models, from acute studies into chronic animal studies, shown that these technologies work over periods of weeks. And they've even done some acute human work. So taking one of these magneto-electrically powered systems and in an operative environment, so a patient in the OR for some other treatment, epilepsy surgery, oncology, placing it on the dura and showing that we can stimulate. Now in this acute study, you can't look at mental health syndromes, but you can look at motor response. And this is a very standard way of sort of calibrating TMS systems. And so by showing that we can get the same kind of motor response that TMS can get, it's a very strong way of saying, hey, we've got the stimulation capability, specificity, and sort of scale that TMS has. So that's a very strong sort of mechanism de-risk or modality de-risk. We can do what TMS does instead of using big external coils, by using these small implantable microstimulators. So that work is all in our past. So there's a lot of great momentum on kind of technology de-risk. And what we're in the midst of this race to do is to sort of turn on that, as we talked about before, that very predictable product development effort, get this technology into a safe, robust, reliable, well-documented submission ready system for humans in the next year to 18 months.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So what's the large company versus small company life like? And like I want to hear both sides, all the dirt, the good stuff, the bad stuff, everything.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the stuff that you take for granted that you very quickly realize was true. So, when we have a conversation about materials or biocompatibility or statistics or any of these specialty topics, you very quickly realize that a company like Medtronic has those resources around. You kind of look over your shoulder and there's a whole team of PhD experts in their field who are there to advise you. And in startup, that's not the case. You look over your shoulder and you look around and you realize, oh, I might be the expert right now. And that's a scary thing. And what you do is you supplement. You find those external experts, you get a good consultant, you very quickly realize all the really smart people who have retired recently who might be contracting consulting, and you call them up and you get them on the payroll. So there's ways to supplement that, but man, the resources of a Medtronic or a big strategic med tech are just unbelievable. The flip side, there are real positives, and I talked a little bit before about the challenges of running these complex portfolios and the challenge to focus. And in a small startup, that is a gift, right? You have one technology, you have one therapy, you have one team. Everybody's pointed in the same direction. There's no questions of prioritization between things. You know what you're working on. You know what you need to do to be successful, and that's a wonderful, that's a wonderful feeling. The thing that goes along with that is speed to decision. So if you need to make a decision, the people you need to help you make that decision are probably in the room, and you can get to these very agile, very tactical decisions very, very quickly, and that's an exciting thing. And again, it's not a criticism of big companies. I think it's a necessary feature of big companies, is that because the competing interests are so much more complex, and because quite frankly, the stakes are so much higher, because you got that scale already, everything just requires more discipline, more thought. And that's not a bug, that's a feature, but man, it's nice to be on the other side of that and have that ability to say, hey, this requirements management tool is not serving our needs. Let's get a new one, and in a week have a new one in-house. That kind of agility is not a thing that you normally see at a big technology company.
How long would something like that take in a big company?
Oh man, there would be an IT team engaged. There'd be a RFP, request for proposals. There would be a sort of structured trial period and decision criteria put out. There would be an impact analysis done. There'd be migration costs to consider. I mean, it might take a year. It might take 6 months. I mean, just night and day difference. And again, those are all real things. Like if you've got 30,000 requirements across a bunch of different products, it's a big deal to migrate them somewhere, and you better think about that. But right now, that's not us, right? We're new, we're blank slate. And so to make that decision, there's really no looking backwards. There's really no maintenance of the status quo to consider. So I don't mean to be critical about big med tech. It's just a different set of decision criteria that are forced to be considered.
I've heard a lot about, expense reports and being able to expense a lot more, and, having more, I guess, like predictable vacation and not having to work, crazy hours and everything like this. How is that? I mean, for you, you worked at, Medtronic 26 years, so you're at least 26 years old. How is it at a more advanced age, as one presumably gets a little bit more comfortable?
Yeah. Well, it is, there is, the pace is different. We try very hard to kind of run a good work-life balance. And that was something that was important to me, and something I talked to Jacob a lot about. It is true that in med tech, and I think probably in general, that more hours doesn't necessarily lead to higher quality work, and it doesn't always lead to more work. And there is a sweet spot there. And especially when you're working on kind of risk critical, safety critical things, you want to bring your best self, your best cognition, your best focus all the time. And so there's a sort of sense in which I would argue that medtech and medtech innovation isn't really consistent with 120-hour weeks. I think others, would argue. There's certainly great examples in the media right now of people sleeping on their desks to get systems to market, and that's a decision that can be made, but it's not a decision that Motif has made, and that's certainly part of the reason I'm here and not elsewhere. I will. The other thing that is true, and perhaps this is the thing I could have known or should have known, but my perspective of being at Medtronic is, there's a lot of people and there's a finite amount of work, but it can be really hard to get that work done, and that's hard, sort of personally, to get excited about doing this thing that 30 other people could be doing, but also just those kind of structural barriers. You got to get a lot of alignment for a decision and all that kind of stuff. So the work is finite, but it's really hard to do. What I find at Motif so far is that the work is sort of infinite. Like, there is so much to do. The team is small. Making medical implants, neurotech devices is a big job. There's kind of infinite work, but man, it's easy to wake up in the morning. It's easy to do that work. It's motivating. It's exciting. You know that you matter. You know that your contributions are critical to success. And a lot of those other, the friction that comes with a big company is just gone. And so I don't know how that'll balance out over time, but that's my initial take is, and the quality, the focus, the flavor of the work, even though it's more, it feels like less. And I hope that lasts a long time.
Yeah, that's really cool. So would you recommend people go to the smaller, more meaningful company, or maybe start in one, end in another, or move at a certain point? What do you think is the perfect recipe?
I don't know if there's a perfect recipe. I'll give some observations. So I will say that being in a big company like Medtronic, one of the things you take for granted is that just expertise everywhere, and spending some time in that environment, learning like a sponge, will make you a better startup asset. So having had those broad-based experiences, having, kind of shipped a bunch of products and seen all the things that could go right and seen all the things that can go wrong, that seasoning, that experience is valuable, is really valuable, is not something to take for granted, and is something that's kind of an accelerator when you go to a startup. Having those playbooks kind of top of mind is just invaluable. So that's an argument, I think, for, go to school and in the big med tech classroom first, and then take those skills out and go somewhere else. You do have to kind of make sure you learn the right lessons, and there are certainly people who get sort of, who understand the big med tech way of doing things and get stuck in there and that, set quality standards unachievably high, or maybe, sort of lack the flexibility, the agility to go, from a place like Medtronic that had such beautiful vertical integration, battery plant in-house, IC designers in-house, all this stuff at your fingertips, the sort of flexibility to assemble that from a bunch of partners and ecosystem kind of contributors, that might not be for everyone. So if you can take the right lessons from big med tech and maintain the kind of flexibility and agility to run, maybe not exactly that playbook, but something similar outside, that's a really nice fit. And I don't know if that's, that may not be everyone, but I found that's something I'm aspiring to do, is take the best of big and apply it to the best of small, and see if we can't create something unique.
Yeah, and maybe make it, like I said earlier, make it big again, and bring in your own,
That's right,
bureaucracy that you remember.
Right. Like I said, I don't think it's necessarily a bug of big companies. I think it's a feature, and it's a necessary consideration of scaling. When you get beyond 100, 200, 300 people, you need some level of overhead to keep all those things pointed in a singular direction.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Steve, this has been great. I've enjoyed this talk, a wide-ranging talk. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's it. This has been wonderful. Keep an eye on Motif. We are small but growing. We'll, I think, specifically have some opportunities opening up in the beginning of the next calendar year, and would love to find a few more people for a small and exciting growing team.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the